Welcome to Calvin's Stories, where a man who built everything refuses to be erased. Enjoy.
My name is Colton Fitzpatrick. I'm 47 years old and I read land for a living. That's what my mother used to say about me, back when she was still alive to say anything at all. Use your eyes, Colton. You read land for a living. I thought she was talking about my job. I thought she was reminding me to be careful at work, to double check my measurements, to verify the property pins before I signed off on a survey. I was wrong. She was telling me something else, and it took her dying for me to hear it. On a Thursday afternoon in late September, I was standing on the shoulder of a county road outside Knoxville, marking a boundary for a man who wanted to build a barn. My phone rang. The number was local, but not saved. I almost let it go to voicemail. I'd been letting a lot of things go that fall. Small calls, small irritations, the slow accumulation of paperwork I kept telling myself I'd read later. I answered because the wind kicked up and I needed something to hold against my ear that wasn't the cold. The voice on the other end said his name was Daryl Holcomb, that he was the general contractor my wife had hired for the lake house renovation, and that he was calling because something on his end didn't look right. He said the words deed transfer. He said the words notary paperwork. And then he said, very gently, the way a man talks to someone he suspects is about to be sick, that he wanted to confirm I'd actually agreed to give him our lake property as payment for $190,000 of work. I want you to do one small thing before I tell you what I did next. If you've ever been the steady one in your family, the dependable one, the person everyone trusts to keep the lights on, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. We tell stories here for the quiet people, the ones who hold everything up and rarely get asked how they're doing. Drop the city you're listening from in the comments. I want to know who's out there with me tonight. And if any part of this story starts to feel familiar, too familiar, say so. You won't be the only one. Now, let me take you back. Because to understand what Daryl Holcomb's phone call did to me, you have to understand the 22 years that came before it. And the woman I built a life with. And the mother who knew before I did. I met Nadine when I was 24. She was working the front desk at her father's HVAC company in Maryville, taking calls and managing invoices and answering to a man who thought women shouldn't do anything more complicated than that. She was sharp. She corrected her father's math in front of customers and made him laugh while she did it. She had a way of making competence look like charm, and I was a young surveyor who admired competence, the way some men admire beauty. We married 14 months after our first date. 2 boys followed, Brennan first, then Miles 4 years later. We bought a brick ranch in West Knoxville with a maple tree in the front yard, and I built a life on the assumption that the woman I'd married was exactly what she appeared to be. She handled the books. From the very beginning, that was our arrangement. I made the money and she managed it, and I was grateful, because I had spent my childhood watching my mother sit at the kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of hospital billing forms, working a second job after her shift ended at the front desk of the East Tennessee Medical Center, just to keep my brother Patrick and me in clothes that fit. My father had left when I was 8. He didn't die. He didn't have an accident. He simply walked out one summer morning and didn't come back, and my mother Margaret raised the 2 of us alone, on a billing clerk's salary, in a small house on Wartburg Avenue with a screen door that never quite closed right. She used to put on her reading glasses at the kitchen table after dinner and go through the bills line by line. Use your eyes, Colton. That's where the phrase came from. She made me sit with her sometimes. Made me read the statements out loud. Made me circle anything I didn't understand. I hated it then. I was 12. I wanted to be outside. I didn't know she was trying to teach me something that would save my life 35 years later. So when Nadine took over our household finances, I thought I was giving her a gift. I thought I was telling her I trusted her. I thought competence meant honesty. I want to say that again, because it's the sentence that defines my whole wound. I thought competence meant honesty. I thought because she could balance a ledger, she would never lie inside one. I thought because she'd been raised in a family business, she understood loyalty the way I'd been raised to understand it. I was wrong about every part of that. And the only person who saw it clearly was a woman who'd been dead for 6 months by the time I figured it out. My mother died in March. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, gone by spring. She fought it the way she fought everything. Quietly, efficiently, without making anyone else carry her weight. She kept working part-time at the hospital until January. She went into hospice on a Tuesday and was gone by Friday. I sat with her the last 2 nights, holding a hand that had gotten so light it felt like I was holding a sparrow. And she told me she loved me, and she told me she was proud of me, and she told me, the last morning, that she had taken care of some things, and I'd find out about them when the time was right. I thought she was talking about her funeral arrangements. I thought she meant the prepaid plot in the Highland Memorial Cemetery and the modest savings account she'd built over 40 years of careful living. I didn't ask her what she meant by things. I should have. But she was tired. And I was tired. And I thought we had more time to talk about whatever needed talking about. We didn't. The first 6 months after she died, I moved through the world like a man underwater. I went to work. I came home. I ate whatever Nadine put in front of me. I slept badly. I noticed, in a distant way, that Nadine seemed energized, rather than diminished by my mother's death. That she'd taken up new projects, ordered new furniture, started talking about renovating the lake property. But I attributed it to grief expressing itself differently in different people. Some people sit still when they're sad. Some people build. I told myself Nadine was the building kind, and I was grateful she was carrying that energy for both of us. The lake property. I should explain. My mother bought a piece of land on Norris Lake in 1989, when prices were still reasonable, and the area was still mostly fishermen and retirees. She built a small cabin on it, with the help of her brother, my Uncle Doyle, and she spent every summer weekend there for the rest of her life. It was the only luxury she ever allowed herself. 2 bedrooms, a screen porch, a dock that needed restaining every 3 years, and a view of the water that made all the years of hospital billing worth it. When my boys were small, she took them up there for whole weeks at a time. Brennan learned to swim off that dock. His first crappie there. The place was stitched into our family the way some places are. My mother told me many times that the lake house would come to me when she was gone. We never wrote anything down. I never asked her to. I trusted her the way she trusted me. So when Nadine started talking in late spring about renovating the lake property, I didn't question it. The deed was being processed through probate, I assumed. Nadine handled the paperwork. Nadine knew a contractor through her sister Jocelyn's husband. Nadine had been getting estimates. I said yes to everything, because saying yes was what I'd been doing for 22 years, and because I was too hollow with grief to ask follow-up questions, and because the woman I'd married had never given me any reason to think follow-up questions were necessary. That was the ground Darrell Holcomb's phone call landed in. He told me, standing on that county road in September, that Nadine had presented him with a preliminary agreement bearing my initials on every page. He told me the agreement specified that upon completion of the renovation, the deed to the lake house would transfer to his construction company as payment in full. He told me the document had been notarized, or appeared to have been, but that his bookkeeper had run the notary's seal through the state registry, and the seal didn't match. He told me he'd been doing this work for 31 years, and he'd never had a client try to pay him in real estate, and the whole arrangement had set off enough alarm bells that he decided to bypass my wife and call me directly. He apologized for the awkwardness. He said he hoped he was overreacting. He said if I confirmed the agreement, he'd proceed with the work and forget the irregularities. I stood there with the wind in my ear and the road dust in my mouth, and I said, very slowly, that I had never seen any such agreement, that I had not initialed any document transferring the lake house, that the lake house, as far as I knew, was still being processed through my mother's estate and was not yet legally mine to transfer to anyone. There was a long silence on Daryl's end. Then he said quietly that he was going to email me the agreement and that he was sorry and that I should probably look at it sitting down. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, like a teenager taking a driving test. I kept thinking the forgery had to be a misunderstanding. She'd shown him a draft, maybe. She'd practiced my signature on a notepad, and someone had pulled the wrong page. There was an explanation. There had to be. I'd been married to this woman for 22 years. I'd watched her braid our son's hair before t-ball games. I'd held her hand at my mother's funeral. People who hold your hand at your mother's funeral don't forge your initials on six-figure real estate documents. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had built 3 different explanations for what I was about to read, and not one of them was going to survive contact with the truth. Nadine wasn't home. The house was quiet in that particular way. A house gets quiet. When someone has stepped out on an errand they don't want questioned. I went to the small office off our bedroom, sat down at my desk, and opened the email Daryl had sent. The document was 12 pages long. My initials, or something that looked very close to my initials, appeared in the lower right corner of every single page. The signature on the final page was a passable forgery of my own. The notary stamp at the bottom belonged to a name I'd never heard of. I read every page twice. The contractor's name was correct. The address of the lake house was correct. The amount was $190,000. The clause transferring the deed was on page 11, written in plain English, requiring no interpretation. My wife had forged my initials on a document that gave away my mother's lake house as payment for a renovation I hadn't authorized. I sat at that desk for a long time. The light through the window changed color. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed. I thought about my mother. I thought about her at the kitchen table on Wartburg Avenue, her reading glasses pushed down on her nose, circling things on hospital statements and saying, "Use your eyes, Colton." And I understood finally what I should have understood years ago. That the reason she'd taught me to read paperwork was because she'd known, somehow, that the people closest to me would one day count on me not reading it. That night, Nadine came home with a grocery bag and a story about traffic on Kingston Pike. She kissed me good morning the next day. She kissed me good morning, and that kiss tasted like an apology I hadn't been given yet. I went to work. I came home. I didn't say anything. I wanted to see what else was there because my mother had taught me that one cockroach in a kitchen means 20 more behind the wall, and I needed to know how far the rot went before I touched it. Over the next 10 days, I learned things I will spend the rest of my life trying to forget. I learned, when I logged into our home equity account for the first time in 3 years, that Nadine had opened a home equity line of credit against our primary residence 8 months earlier, forging my electronic signature on the application. She had drawn $85,000 in 4 installments. I had no idea where the money had gone. The statements were being sent to an email address I'd never seen. I learned when my brother Patrick came over for a beer on a Saturday afternoon. And I asked him, very carefully, whether Nadine had ever approached him about money, that she had asked him to co-sign a business loan 18 months ago. She had told him I'd approved it. She had told him I was too proud to ask my own brother for help, so she was doing it for me. Patrick had refused. Nadine had told him he was jealous of our success, that he'd always resented me, and that she'd remember this conversation. Patrick had been sitting on this for a year and a half, not wanting to drive a wedge, hoping he'd misunderstood. When I told him about the contractor, his face went the color of wet concrete. I learned when Jocelyn, Nadine's own sister, called me out of nowhere on a Sunday evening that she had loaned Nadine $40,000 a year and a half ago on the explicit understanding that I knew about the loan and had approved it. She had texts She had a string of messages where Nadine had written, "Colton insisted we'd pay you back by Christmas." Jocelyn had been waiting for that payment for 10 months. She'd finally called me because Christmas had come and gone twice, and her own husband was asking questions. She cried on the phone. She kept saying, "I'm so sorry, Colton. I never would have if I'd known." I learned when Miles, my 19-year-old, home from his sophomore year at UT for the summer, pulled a stack of paper out of our home printer and brought it to me with a strange expression that Nadine had been making monthly payments of $6,200 for 11 months to a Mercedes leasing company. The car she drove, the car she'd told everyone, including me, including my mother before she died, was a company vehicle from her family's HVAC business. It wasn't. Her family's HVAC business had been struggling for 3 years. There was no company car. There were $6,200 a month coming out of an account I'd never seen. What I found in that printer changed the next 4 months of my life. I learned when I drove out to the lake house one Wednesday afternoon to take pictures for my own records that there was a mechanic's lien filed against the property by a roofing company in Maryville. The roofing company said Nadine had promised them payment using the lake property as collateral and then stopped returning their calls. There was a second lien being prepared by a landscaping outfit. There was a contractor in Sevierville claiming she owed him for cabinet work she'd commissioned and never paid for. The lake house, my mother's lake house, the place where my boys had learned to swim, was being eaten alive by debts I'd never heard of, in my mother's name, through a deed Nadine apparently believed was already hers. And then, on a Friday morning, my phone rang while I was eating breakfast. The number was a Knoxville landline I half recognized. I let it ring 3 times because Nadine was sitting across from me with her coffee. I finally picked up in the laundry room. It was Harold Beasley, my mother's accountant. He'd done her taxes for 15 years. He was the kind of man who wore the same brown sweater vest in every season and called my mother ma'am until the day she died. He said very quietly that he was sorry to bother me, but that he'd received a call 2 days earlier from a woman claiming to be the executor of my mother's estate, requesting copies of all the trust documents on file. He had not given her anything. He said, "Your mother told me to expect a call like that." He said, "I need you to come into my office." He said, "Don't bring your wife." When I came back into the kitchen, Nadine looked up from her phone and said, "Who was that?" I said, "Wrong number." She held my eyes for a beat too long. 2 weeks later, I'd understand why Harold sounded afraid on the phone. That Friday, I just thought he was being cautious. I drove to Harold's office that afternoon, telling Nadine I had a survey to finish. Harold's office was on the second floor of a small brick building in Bearden, above a dry cleaner. He met me at the door with his sweater vest and his thin gray hair combed straight back. He sat me down in a leather chair that creaked when I moved. He poured me a cup of coffee I didn't want, and then he hesitated. He said, "Your mother asked me to stay out of family matters, Colton. She made me promise. I promised her." I took the forged HELOC application out of my bag and laid it on his desk. He looked at it for a long time. He turned the pages slowly, the way a man turns the pages of an autopsy report. Then he was quiet for 10 full seconds. I counted, and he said, "She told me this day would come." He said, "I have a second envelope." He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a manila folder. Inside the folder was a sealed white envelope with my name on the front in my mother's handwriting. He said, "Your mother gave me 2 envelopes 8 months before she died. The first one went into the trust file at the attorney's office. This one she gave to me to hold separately, in case the first one was tampered with. She said if you came to me alone asking the right questions, I was to give you this one." He pushed it across the desk. He said, "I'm sorry I waited so long, Colton." She was very specific. My hands knew before I did. They were shaking when I picked up the envelope. I didn't open it in his office. I took it home and locked it in the gun safe in my closet, and waited for the formal trust reading, which was scheduled for the following Friday at the estate attorney's conference room in downtown Knoxville. I wanted to read whatever my mother had written in the right setting, the way she would have wanted. I wanted Patrick there. I wanted my boys there. I wanted Nadine to be in the room when it happened, because I had begun to suspect, and Harold's careful silence had confirmed, whatever my mother had written was meant to be heard out loud in front of witnesses by everyone. The week before the reading was the longest week of my life. Nadine, sensing something, she was many things, but she wasn't stupid, went into what I can only describe as a charm offensive. She organized a surprise anniversary dinner at a restaurant downtown. 22 years, she announced to the table, lifting her glass. 22 years with this man who never says no to me. She laughed when she said it. Our friends laughed with her. I sat at the head of the table with a glass of wine I couldn't taste and watched a woman I'd loved for half my life perform a version of our marriage that had never existed. She touched my hand across the tablecloth. She told the story of how we met. She cried, just a little, when she talked about my mother. I sat there, and I smiled, and I thought about the envelope in my gun safe, and I waited. 2 days before the trust reading, I came home and found Nadine in my office. She was standing very still, holding my phone, which I'd left charging on the desk. She turned when I walked in. She held the phone up and said, "Why is your mother's accountant calling you?" Her voice was light. Her eyes weren't. I said he wanted to know if I'd received my mother's reading glasses. She'd left them to me specifically, and they'd gotten misfiled in the estate inventory. The lie came out of me whole and smooth, the way water comes out of a tap. Nadine looked at me for a long moment. Then she smiled and handed me the phone and said, "Okay, sweetheart." She left the room. I sat down in my desk chair and put my hands flat on the desk and waited for them to stop trembling. That was the night I called Patrick. I told him everything. I told him about Daryl Holcomb and the forged deed transfer, about the HELOC and the Mercedes payments and Jocelyn's $40,000, and the liens on the lake house, and the second envelope in my mother's handwriting. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Mom knew, didn't she?" He said she knew the whole time. I said, "I think so. I think she did." The morning of the trust reading was clear and cold. October, the kind of October day where the sky over East Tennessee goes thin and high, and the light gets honest. I put on a charcoal suit I'd bought for my mother's funeral. Nadine wore a navy dress and pearl earrings my mother had given her on our 10th anniversary. We drove downtown together in near silence. She made a comment about traffic. I agreed with her. We parked in the garage on Gay Street and walked 4 blocks to the attorney's office, and Nadine held my elbow the whole way, like a woman being escorted to a gala. I thought about the envelope folded in the inside pocket of my suit jacket. I thought about my mother's handwriting on the front of it. I thought about the way her reading glasses used to slide down her nose when she was angry about a hospital bill that didn't add up. The conference room was on the 8th floor. Patrick was already there with his wife, Janine. My older son, Brennan, had driven down from Nashville the night before, looking thinner than the last time I'd seen him. His jaw set in the careful way he sets it when he's trying not to ask a question. Miles was there too, in a button-down shirt he'd ironed himself. Jocelyn was there. I had asked her to come. She and Nadine had not spoken in 4 days, since the night Jocelyn had called me, and Nadine's face when she saw her sister at the long oak table did something complicated and brief before she found her composure again. The estate attorney was a woman named Lillian Crowder. Mid-50s, gray bob, half-moon glasses on a chain around her neck. She had handled my mother's affairs for the last decade of her life. She sat at the head of the table with a leather portfolio in front of her, and she greeted each of us by name, and she opened the folder, and she began. The room itself had the smell of old paper and lemon polish. The conference table was oak, scratched along one edge where decades of legal pads and signet rings had worn the finish down to bare grain. I ran my thumb across that scratch once, twice, the way you rub a worry stone. The windows behind Lillian looked out over Gay Street, and the morning light came through them in flat, hard panels, falling across the table in 3 exact bars. A pitcher of water sweated in the center. 6 glasses around it, untouched. The radiator under the window ticked once and was silent. I counted the legal pads in front of each chair. There were 9. There were only 8 of us. She read the standard provisions first. The savings account, divided between Patrick and me. The household furnishings, to be distributed by mutual agreement. The car, to Patrick. The reading glasses. And Lillian paused here, just slightly, and looked at me over her half moons. To Colton, specifically. With a note that he would know why. Nadine beside me made a small sound that might have been a laugh. I felt it in my forearm where her shoulder leaned against mine. Then Lillian turned the page and said, "Now we come to the trust amendment, filed by Mrs. Fitzpatrick 14 months ago." I felt Nadine stiffen. Not a flinch, exactly. Something quieter. The way a deer freezes when the wind changes. Lillian explained, in her careful attorney's voice, that 14 months before her death, my mother had transferred 3 assets into an irrevocable trust, naming only me and my 2 sons as beneficiaries. The lake house on Norris Lake. A life insurance payout of $310,000, designating the trust as the recipient, and a certificate of deposit my mother had been quietly building for 19 years, totaling just over $140,000. The trust contained a spendthrift clause specifically excluding any spouse of any beneficiary from accessing, claiming, or attaching the assets in the event of divorce, civil judgment, or any other legal action. Nadine reached for her phone. It was the same gesture I had watched her make 10,000 times across 22 years of marriage. The flick of the wrist, the thumb already moving before the screen lit up. Only this time my eye caught on the small things. The slight tremor in her knuckle. The chip polish on her index finger. The way she angled the screen away from me so I could not read what she was typing. I had rehearsed this silence for 6 months. I let it run. Lillian looked at her without blinking, set down her pen, and removed her glasses. The half moons swung once at the end of their chain and came to rest against her sternum. "The transfer was recorded 14 months ago, Mrs. Fitzpatrick," she said, "with the Register of Deeds. There's nothing to contest." Nadine's thumb stopped moving. She did not put the phone down. She did not pick it up further. It hovered above her lap, lit, useless. Then Lillian said, "And there is one more document. Mrs. Fitzpatrick included a sealed letter to be read aloud at this gathering." She turned to me. "Colton, your mother indicated you would have a second copy. Would you like me to read from mine?" I took the envelope out of my suit pocket and laid it on the table. The paper was creased from a week in the gun safe and a morning against my chest. My mother's handwriting on the front looked smaller than I remembered. 3 words. Just my name. I pressed the envelope flat against the oak with the palm of my hand. I said, "Please, read it." Lillian opened her copy. The sound of the envelope tearing was the loudest thing in the room. She unfolded the pages. There were 4 of them. Single-spaced, in my mother's handwriting, reproduced through whatever photocopier Harold Beasley had owned in the spring of her dying. Lillian cleared her throat. Once. She began to read. "My dear Colton, if you are hearing these words, then I have not had the chance to say them to your face, and I am sorry for that. I am writing this in the spring, after a doctor's visit that did not go the way I hoped. I am 8 months from a death I have not yet told you about. Forgive me. I needed time to put things in order, and I knew if you knew, you would spend that time with me instead of letting me work." Patrick made a small sound across the table. I did not look at him. I was looking at the bar of light. that fell across the third page in Lillian's hand. I was watching. For the moment her voice would change. I have to tell you some things now. I should have told you sooner. I thought, for many years, that you would see it on your own. I underestimated how loyal you are. Loyalty is not a flaw, Colton, but it can be used by people who do not deserve it, and your wife does not deserve yours. The room did not move. Nadine's phone went dark in her hand. I saw the screen die out of the corner of my eye. She did not look up. She was looking at the grain of the oak directly in front of her, the way a person looks at a road they are about to be hit on. 2 years ago, in February, Nadine came to me alone. She asked me for $250,000. She called it a loan. She said you had agreed to it, but were too proud to ask. I knew immediately you had not agreed to it because you have never been too proud to ask me for anything in your life. And because Nadine could not look me in the eye when she said your name, I refused her. She left angry. The next week, she came back and tried again with a different number. I refused her again. The third time, in May, she did not come herself. She submitted a forged authorization to my bank with a signature that was supposed to be mine, requesting a transfer of $75,000 to an account in her name. My bank called me. The signature was not even close. The bank kept copies. Harold has them. They are attached to this letter. I sat there. I felt Brennan across the table turn his head slowly toward his mother. I heard the chair beneath him creak. I heard Jocelyn exhale. A single long breath. The way you breathe out when a doctor finally tells you the name of the thing. Lillian kept reading. I did not tell you, Colton, because I was afraid of what it would do to your boys. And I was afraid you would not believe me. I made a different choice instead. I moved everything I could into a trust she cannot touch. I moved the lake house first because I knew she would come for it. I moved the insurance and the CD because I wanted you to have a foundation when the rest of this came apart. And Colton, my love, it is going to come apart. By the time you read this, it may already have. I am sorry. I wish I could have spared you this. But I could not spare you from her without telling you the truth. And I could not tell you the truth while I was still alive because I was a coward about your happiness. Forgive me for that. Lillian paused. She turned the page. The paper made a sound like a small dry leaf. You are not blind, Colton. You are loyal. There's a difference, and the difference matters. You read land for a living, my son. You know how to look at a boundary and see what is there. You have always known. You simply did not look at this boundary because you trusted the surveyor. Trust the work now. Trust your own eyes. The papers will tell you everything. They always have. Use the lake house. Take your boys there. Sit on the dock in the evenings and listen to the trees. The insurance money is for you to rebuild whatever needs rebuilding. A house, a business, a life. The CD is for the boys' futures, in whatever way you decide. I trust your judgment because I helped build it. You were a careful child, Colton. You will be a careful man without her. One more thing. I have left you my reading glasses. I know that is a strange thing to leave a grown man, but I want you to put them on your desk where you can see them. Not to wear, just to remember. Use your eyes, Colton. Read past the first page. Read every page. Read the small print in the back of the envelope and the date in the corner. Read everything. Always. That is the only piece of advice I have ever given you that mattered. And I am giving it to you one more time. From wherever I am now. I love you. I have always loved you. I am so proud of the man you became, even before you knew you had to become him. Be brave now. The hard part is over. The work is yours. Your mother. Lillian stopped reading. She set the pages down. She did not look at Nadine. She looked at me. The room was completely silent. I counted the seconds inside that silence the way I counted off chains on a survey line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang once and was answered. 43 seconds passed before anyone spoke. Then Lillian said, and attached to this letter are 3 photocopies of forged authorization forms submitted to First Tennessee Bank in February, March, and May of the year in question, witnessed by Harold Beasley, your mother's accountant. They are projected behind me now. I had not noticed her assistant dim the lights. I had not noticed the assistant enter the room. The forged forms appeared on the wall behind Lillian's chair, one after another, the projector humming low under the table. My mother's name in someone else's handwriting. The signatures crude, up, close. The way forgeries always are when you look at them long enough. The loops, too tight. The M in Margaret, a different M, every time. The dates stamped in red along the right margin. A teller's initials in the corner of one of them. A small, careful CH that meant somebody in a branch on Kingston Pike had once looked at my mother's name and thought no. The third form stayed on the wall. Nobody moved to take it down. Brennan turned to Nadine. He said, very quietly, "You told me Dad was the liar." The words came out flat, almost gentle, the way Brennan has spoken since he was small when something has hurt him too much to be loud about. He said, "You told me he was hiding money." He said, "You said, Grandma's says estate was, say it was $1 million, and Dad was keeping it from us. He said, you told me he didn't love us the same way you did. He said, you told me he was the reason you cried." Nadine's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Brennan," Nadine said finally. "Honey." Brennan stood up. The chair pushed back behind him with a small sharp scrape. He walked around the table and stood behind my chair, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and he did not look at his mother again. His hand was warm through the wool of the suit. It stayed there. Miles, on the other side of me, was crying quietly. He had not said a word the entire morning. He took my hand under the table and held it the way he used to hold it, crossing the street when he was 4 years old. His thumb pressed against the inside of my wrist, where my pulse was. I felt his pulse meet mine. 2 pulses, slightly out of step, then matching, then out of step again. Nadine, at the other end of the table, reached again for her phone. Lillian said, without raising her voice, "Mrs. Fitzpatrick, please do not remove anything from this room. The originals of the documents you are looking at are in the custody of First Tennessee Bank, and copies have been provided to the Knox County District Attorney's Office as of this morning." Nadine's hand stopped halfway to the phone. She pulled it back. She pressed it flat to the table. The pearls in her ears, my mother's pearls, caught the light from the window and threw 2 small white sparks against the far wall. Jocelyn put her face in her hands. Her shoulders moved twice and were still. Patrick was crying. He was not making any sound. I had never seen my brother cry, except at our mother's funeral. And even then he had cried in the parking lot, alone, with his back to the rest of us. Janine beside him put her hand on the back of his neck and left it there. Nadine said, "Colton, just my name. The first syllable, longer than the second, the way she had said it for 22 years when she wanted me to look at her." I did not look at her. She said, "Colton, this isn't... Your mother was sick. Your mother was on medication. Your mother didn't know what she was." Lillian raised one finger off the table, just one. Nadine stopped. I sat in that chair with my older son's hand on my shoulder and my younger son's hand in mine, and I felt my mother in the room. Not as a ghost, as a presence, as the person who had spent 8 months of her own dying, writing me a letter that would, 14 months later, hold the floor of my life. When the floor of my life finally gave way. I thought about her at the kitchen table on Wartburg Avenue. I thought about her reading glasses sliding down her nose. I thought about her saying, "Use your eyes, Colton." And I understood for the first time that she had not been raising a surveyor. She had been raising a son who would survive the marriage she had seen coming before I had. I let the silence sit on the table between us. I did not rush to fill it. I had rehearsed this silence too. Then I turned my head, finally, and I looked at Nadine across the long oak table, and I said the only sentence I had prepared for this room. I said, "You told me I would never read past the first page." The thing about a surveyor is we always read every page. Her face did not move. It's set the way concrete sets, in stages, somewhere behind the eyes first. Lillian closed the folder. She said, "This concludes the reading. Copies of the trust and the letter will be distributed to the beneficiaries this afternoon. Mrs. Fitzpatrick, you will receive notice from the district attorney's office within the next several business days." She slid her glasses back up her nose. She did not soften her voice. She did not need to. Nadine stood up. Her chair did not scrape. She lifted it back, careful, the same way she had set every table in our house for 2 decades. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the handle. She turned, just her head, and she looked at me one last time. And she said, "You'll regret this." I said, "No, Nadine. I won't." She opened the door. She walked out. The door closed behind her with the soft click of a well-hung hinge. Nobody moved for a long time. Then Patrick stood up. He came around the table. He did not say anything. He pulled me out of the chair and held me, the way he had held me at 8 years old in the kitchen on Wartburg Avenue the morning our father did not come back from the gas station. Brennan and Miles stood up too. The 4 of us stood there in the corner of that conference room, with the projector still humming, and the forged signature still bright on the wall behind us, and we did not say anything. And we did not let go. The fall came fast after that. The mechanic's liens triggered a credit review at the bank, which exposed the forged HELOC, which triggered a referral to the district attorney for forgery and financial fraud. Jocelyn filed a civil suit for her $40,000 within a week. The Mercedes leasing company, finding their payments suddenly returned, repossessed the car from our driveway on a Tuesday morning. I watched from the kitchen window as the flatbed driver hooked the cables, the chain rattling against the bumper, the car lifting at a slight angle, and then settling onto the bed of the truck. The driver was a young man in a Carhartt jacket who never looked at the house. He did his work, and he left. The driveway looked larger after the car was gone. I noticed an oil stain I had never seen before, a dark teardrop on the concrete where the engine had sat for 11 months. Nadine's parents, who had loved me like a son for 22 years, called me to apologize. Her father wept on the phone. He said, "Colton, my boy, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry." He said it 11 times. I counted. Her mother said, "We did not know. We did not know." She said it twice, and then she could not say anything more. Jocelyn shared the text messages in the family group chat, and Nadine's own family stopped speaking to her by the end of the month. She moved into a furnished apartment off Cedar Bluff Road with a suitcase and a single box of clothes. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter on a Thursday morning, in a small porcelain dish my mother had given us the Christmas before she died. I left the ring in the dish. I left the dish on the counter for 6 weeks. Then I put both of them in a drawer. My attorney filed for divorce on grounds of fraud. His name was Whit Lambert, a thin, patient man with a Tennessee bar pin in his lapel, and a habit of writing left-handed in a notebook nobody else was allowed to read. He told me, the first morning we met, that I was going to see to one good week and one bad week, and then another good week in cycles for about 4 months, and that I should not make any large decisions on the bad weeks. He was right about every part of that. The trust assets, shielded by my mother's spendthrift clause, were not on the table. Nadine's attorney attempted to argue that the lake house was marital property because we had used it during the marriage. The judge dismissed the motion in 11 minutes. I sat in the gallery. and watched the judge read the spendthrift clause. Watched her mouth move silently as she read the words. Watched her look up at Nadine's attorney with an expression that I will remember the rest of my life. The HELOC was treated as fraudulent debt, attached entirely to her in the final settlement. She tried to call me twice in November. The first time I let it ring. The phone sat on the kitchen counter and rang 9 times and stopped. I made coffee. I drank it standing at the sink, looking at the maple tree in the front yard, which had gone the color of a banked fire. The second time I answered, and she said, "Colton, please, we can fix this." And I said, "No, Nadine, we cannot." And I hung up. The whole call was 19 seconds. I timed it after, against the clock on the microwave. I have not spoken to her since. She tried to reach Brennan in December. She told him she had been overwhelmed, that grief had made her do things she didn't understand, that she had always loved his father. Brennan listened. He told me later that he listened for almost 40 minutes, and he never spoke once until at the end he said, "Mom, I hope you get help, and I will not be the person who provides it." He said it the same flat, gentle way he had said the words in the conference room. He hasn't taken her calls since. Miles, the younger one, has not spoken to her at all. He told me one night, sitting on the back steps with a beer, he was not technically old enough to drink, that he'd loved his mother, and he no longer knew what that meant, and I told him it was all right to not know yet. I told him I didn't fully know either. The crickets were loud that night. The porch light was off because we had agreed, without saying so, to sit in the dark. We sat on the steps for a long time without saying anything else. At some point, Miles leaned his shoulder against mine. He stayed that way until the beer was finished. Patrick comes over for dinner most Sundays now. He brings Janine and a casserole. We talk about our mother. We talk about the old house on Wartburg. We talk about the screen door that never closed right, and the hospital bills she circled in red pen and the way she used to hum hymns under her breath when she was doing the math. We talk about my father sometimes, the man who walked out, and we agree finally that our mother had been the one all along, the steady one, the careful one, the one who saw what was coming and built against it. We are both still learning how to grieve her. Some weeks the grief is small and survivable. Some weeks it sits on my chest like a stone. The letter helps. I keep a copy of it in my desk drawer, alongside her reading glasses. The glasses are gold-rimmed, scratched on the left lens. The earpiece is slightly bent from 40 years of being pushed up onto her hair and pulled back down again. I take them out when I need to. I do not put them on. I just set them on the desk and look at them. That is enough. A man from Daryl Holcomb's office called me in late October to apologize for what their company had been pulled into. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. I told him he had done me a favor I would not be able to repay. He said his bookkeeper had wanted me to know that her instincts had told her something was off the moment she saw the notary stamp. He said she had run it through the registry on a hunch, on her lunch break, eating a sandwich at her desk. I said, "Please thank her for me." I said, "Please tell her she saved my house." I meant the lake house, but I also meant the other thing. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I will tell her, Mr. Fitzpatrick. I think she'll be glad to hear it. It is a Tuesday in late spring now. I'm sitting on the dock at the lake house. The water is flat, and the trees are loud with insects, the way they get this time of year in East Tennessee. A single bass jumped about 10 minutes ago, just past the end of the dock, and the rings of it are still spreading wide and slow across the cove. The boards under me are warm. They smell of the new stain we put down in April, Brennan and Miles and me. The three of us on our knees with brushes and a radio. Miles is inside making pasta. He learned from a YouTube video and is fiercely proud of the sauce. I can hear him through the open kitchen window, talking to himself about garlic. Brennan drove down from Nashville last night and is sitting in a chair behind me, with a fishing rod he hasn't cast yet. He is not going to cast it. He brought it the way men bring objects to be near each other. My mother's reading glasses are on the dock railing next to my coffee, catching the last of the evening light. The left lens throws a small bent rainbow onto the wood. The letter is folded in my shirt pocket. I keep it there most days. I miss my mother's voice. I miss the way she said, "Use your eyes, Colton. You read land for a living." I understand now, finally, what she was telling me. She was telling me that loyalty is not the same as blindness. She was telling me that the people who love you read the paperwork with you. She was telling me that anyone who tells you not to read it is the person you most need to read it about. I used to think competence was the same as honesty. I was wrong. They are different things. And the difference is what almost cost me everything I had left. If you are listening to this, and there's someone in your life who keeps telling you not to read the paperwork, read the paperwork. Read every page. Read the small print and the back of the envelope and the date in the corner. If you have been the steady one, the dependable one, the person everyone calls when something needs holding up, ask yourself, gently, whether someone is depending on your steadiness to keep you blind. Ask yourself what you have almost not read. And if any part of this story has reached you tonight, you are not alone in it. There are more of us than you think. The quiet ones, the loyal ones, the ones who trusted too long. You are allowed to begin again. Someone, somewhere, may already be making sure you can. That has been my story tonight. One letter, written 8 months before a death, that held the floor of my life when the floor gave way. One pair of reading glasses on a dock railing in the last light. One son, standing behind my chair, with his hand on my shoulder, while a lawyer read the truth out loud. If this has reached you, if you have been the dependable one, if someone is counting on your blindness, if you are sitting with a piece of paper you have been afraid to read, leave a comment and tell me. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. We tell them here,